Good evening, people that have joined. We're going to get started in a moment, but there is a poll open. So if you want to complete that whilst you're waiting. We did email out, I think, to almost everyone who registered, maybe just the last couple of people, the agenda and these points. So, but please use the chat function to ask any questions throughout the next hour and a half. Here's the agenda, just in case anyone didn't see it in the email. So we're going to get started with speakers in about 10 minutes. We've really been bowled over with the number of people that have registered, so thanks everyone. And we've got already 63 people online. So considering the heat and the sun out there, yeah, that's really impressive. So thank you for joining. I'm going to hand over now to Claire. So Claire Maltby is the Director for the Midlands and East region in at Sustrans. Thank you, Claire.
Hi, welcome everyone. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, particularly on what is an absolutely gorgeous sunny evening when I'm sure there's other stuff that people could have been tempted by. And particularly thank you to all our speakers for giving up their evening to join us this evening. As Tim was just saying, we've had a phenomenal response to this event. So I think at the last count, there's 125 or so people that had registered, which is amazing. And that just signals to me what a huge interest there is in this agenda in the city of Birmingham and an appetite for people to learn more and to participate. And we are delighted to be involved in supporting communities and the local authority to improve transport and air quality in this way. So our vision at Sustrans is a society where the way we travel creates healthier places and happier lives for everyone. So we want livable cities and towns where people can travel in an enjoyable and healthy and sustainable way. And this project, our Brum project, is helping the people of Birmingham to achieve that. So we'll get started with our speakers in a moment. But first of all, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge what the Brum project, which was commissioned by Birmingham City Council, what it's achieved over the last 6 months. I wanted to thank the 60 people and 12 community and faith groups that have engaged with our team since the project started in January this year. And I think particularly when you consider the context of a pandemic and what has been an extremely difficult time for a lot of people, that's a great level of involvement. There have been some really fantastic conversations in the workshops and the webinars delivered over the last 6 months, and also some really great resources which have been co-designed with local people. And you'll get a link to access these materials and resources after tonight's webinar. Chris's air quality tool that we're going to hear about shortly is one of these amazing resources that's been put together. So thanks so much to Chris for volunteering and to the council for sharing the data to make that possible. So we're looking forward to continuing to support more people and groups to improve air quality, and hopefully with the continuation of this project. And we're really pleased with what it's achieved and really grateful for everyone's involvement. So it's a really good thing. So let's start tonight's conversation. So first of all, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who's Councillor Zaffar. He's the Cabinet Member for Transport and the Environment at Birmingham City Council.
Thank you, Claire. And Wasim, there's quite a few people just joining, so please use the chat function to ask questions at any time. We'll ask one question to each speaker after they've spoken, and then there'll be a wider Q&A at the end. So,
Thank you. Sorry, apologies, I was muted there. Good evening to everybody, and thank you for joining us. Can I thank colleagues at Sustrans for organising this very, very important session this evening? And can I thank you for the work that you've been doing with the council and with our communities over the past few months with this particular project, but over the years on many other projects. And can I thank the participants on this call, because many of them are very, very actively involved in supporting the aspirations of Birmingham becoming a clean air city, where the fundamental human right of breathing clean air is something that is enjoyed by each and every one of our citizens. I'm going to touch upon very briefly some of the work that's been taking place on the emergency Birmingham transport plan. Next slide, please. Thanks. So COVID has created massive challenges, in particular health challenges for communities right, not just across the country, but across the world. But there have been some opportunities that we think we need to absolutely capture and ensure that as the lockdown eases, we make these new opportunities, in particular around walking and cycling, the new norm. Obviously, we've seen a substantial reduction in traffic at one stage. We saw a 70% reduction in traffic that correlated with something like a 36% reduction in NOx levels within Birmingham. We also saw some challenges around, and continue to see challenges around public transport, capacity and confidence, and that brings its own challenges. And the last thing we want is to follow the model of certain countries when they went from lockdown, and many of the journeys went from public transport straight to private car, and it's really important that we don't follow that particular sort of pattern. We had some issues around speeding and dangerous driving during the lockdown too, but what we saw in terms of a positive was a substantial increase in walking and cycling, generally for leisure initially, people who were allowed the 1 hour of exercise per day, they were really taking advantage of walking and cycling. We also saw many people comment on social media about the clean air across the city too, and clearly the people for many of the first times, they really valued the clean air within their communities. The quieter streets and the improved air quality also made people reimagine how they can, our streets look like when car isn't dominant. I've been campaigning for some time about creating a car-free day in Birmingham, but we literally saw a month of car helped communities better understand the opportunities available when car isn't so dominant. Next slide, please. So we launched the draft Birmingham transport plan in January with a lot of positive stuff within that, and we had a very, very clear vision in that, and we've really built upon the work that we started with the draft Birmingham transport plan and evolved it into the need of the hour, which is the emergency transport plan on the back of COVID. And the key thing, I'm not going to read all this because we've got, I'm short of time, but the key thing for us was ensuring that there was a low carbon clean recovery from COVID-19, and we, wherever possible, supported communities to make them more active and support their new habits in terms of walking and cycling. So next slide, please. Following on from the draft Birmingham transport plan, we also picked up and built upon the 4 big moves. So the 4 big moves in the Birmingham transport plan was obviously reallocating road space, transforming the city centre, prioritising active travel in local neighbourhoods, and managing demand through parking measures. So we utilised those 4 key principles within the emergency transport plan, but obviously there was a slight shift where we went from reallocated road space from single occupancy private car use to creating safe places for walking and cycling, and that was a really, really important piece of work that we want to we'll touch upon in a second. Obviously, transforming the city centre, the cells project, the traffic cells where sustainable transport would take priority in the city centre, was something that we really wanted to push within this emergency transport plan. And we're going to trial in the next few weeks more walking and cycling priority within the city centre. For me, prioritising active travel in local neighbourhoods is probably the most important of the big moves. We've seen, and we've got a glimpse of what communities look like when people and walking and cycling start to dominate private streets, and it's how we can start to build that forward and capture that as an opportunity in creating this cultural change within our city. And one thing I've been very, very keen to do is ensure that we've got these active travel neighbourhoods being pushed in areas where there's high levels of inequality. We're blessed with many good affluent areas and neighbourhoods in our city who are demanding these changes, and rightly so. But I think it's really important that we look at some of those communities, places like mine in Lozells, where we had some of the highest levels of COVID deaths and COVID-related incidents, and literally because we've got some of the worst health inequalities in these areas. So I think it's important that we start to make those cultural changes in those particular communities too. And obviously, we also want to repurpose land and space away from parking towards supporting walking, cycling, and particularly social distancing too. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this is a map of the city where our 14 key projects that we pushed forward in the Emergency Active Trial Fund. So we're hoping in the next 24 hours to get news that the government's approved the tranche 1 of the funding, which is £1 million, which we match funded with another £600,000 we had in the city to pull together 14 projects to the value of £1.6 million. And we've got 7 pop-up cycle routes, which really have been generated from the walking and cycling strategy that many of you would have been involved in and participated within that. And these are temporary projects which we will deliver within the next 8 weeks. So we're fighting against time to ensure that we can deliver these 14 projects. And obviously we will need the help of many people on this call in ensuring that we're engaging with communities, we're championing this within communities. These are temporary measures, so we won't go down the route of formal consultations. But to make this a success, we do really need communities on side. We do have the 2 low traffic neighbourhoods in Brandywine and Kings Heath and Lozells and Newtown. Those are the 2 we're piloting. More social distancing measures to build on what we've done in Erdington, Acox Green, Kings Heath, and a number of others that we've done in the city centre to support the opening of the non-retail sector, and by introducing more social distancing measures in Moseley and Sturchley. Sorry, so there's quite a bit there. Next slide, please. So this is just recapping on the project. So Park and Pedal is really important, and we pulled this emergency transport plan together literally, I think, 4 days after Grant Shapps Downing Street briefing. It was on a Saturday evening. I think on the Sunday, a number of officers were on a call with me. On Monday evening and Tuesday evening, we also had key partners on a Zoom call. So I think 20 odd partners on a Zoom call to help shape these plans published. And that was really because we worked extremely hard and we had the buy-in of community. And I think because the relationships existed within our city from the work we've been doing over the past few years, we could very quickly bring like-minded people together to help co-design and co-produce this emergency transport plan, which converted into the Emergency Active Trial for tranche 1 projects. And as I say, we're hoping to get the announcement in the next 24 hours and deliver these in the next 8 weeks at the same time as we start to develop the tranche 2 projects. I'm conscious about time and the chair's cameras.
Thank you, Wasim. Thank you very much. So we are going to have a full Q&A at the end. And I was struggling to see the chat box for a while. That was my technical skills there. So, but I don't think we've had a question. We've had a few people commenting saying it, certainly that the map is the best thing that they've, their favourite map at the moment. Wasim, one question actually that has come in is around road schemes. I think there were a couple in the plans as I suppose as the transport plan went to consultation in February, and I think have those been halted now? So somebody's asking around that. Are they those those sort of road efficiency schemes?
Yeah, David's asked this question, and David's been campaigning against the original proposal of the for Dudley Road, and I know there's been people campaigning on Moseley Road. I can absolutely categorically confirm that both projects have been shelved, both schemes, and we're working on redesigning the schemes with walking, cycling, and the policies of the Birmingham transport plan, the 4 big some work that the officers have been doing on the Dudley Road scheme this afternoon, and it's quite exciting, and I'm pretty confident that David and other colleagues, when we are able to share that in the coming weeks, will be really pleased to see what we're doing. So we absolutely want to ensure that sustainable transport, walking, cycling, public transport is at the heart of everything that we do moving forward.
Fantastic. Wasim, thank you very much for covering such a big plan in in so little time. So there will be more questions at the end. Unfortunately, Wazim can't stay for the full duration of the event, but we have Steve and Joe Green as well, who'll be sitting in for Wazim and at the end on the Q&A. So Wazim, thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing more. And this is just the start this evening in terms of conversation. So it's good that people are maybe left with more questions and wanting to know more details. So we hand over now to Dr. Suzanne Bartington from the University of Birmingham.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to Sustrans more widely as well for the invitation, and it's great to have such a super turnout this evening. I'm a public health doctor at the University of Birmingham and the health lead for the West Midlands Air Quality Improvement Programme, but also with a broader interest in the links between active travel and health, and the health benefits from policy interventions with regard to active travel. And really that is the focus of this evening. It's just a flavour of where we are in terms of active travel more broadly, and thinking where we sit now with regard to COVID-19 in the context of historical trends and changes in transport patterns. Next slide, please. So as a public health doctor, why am I interested in COVID, transport and health? Well, they're all linked to each other. We're obviously well aware of the relationship between COVID and health, and also how it's obviously exposed health inequity as well. Transport itself has obviously impacted upon the spread of the pandemic, but also has very direct links to health. So both through physical health in terms of particularly chronic disease risk. We know that 1 in 6 deaths in the UK is due to physical inactivity, and that 1 in 3 men and 1 in 3 adult women don't meet physical activity guidelines, and that itself is a major risk to health. There are also mental health impacts due to transport poverty, and as I mentioned, coming back to this health inequity, all of these tend to be focused in the most deprived areas and contribute to the poorest health outcomes. Environmental harms, which my colleague Bill Bloss will be speaking more about this evening. We know that poor air quality is responsible for loss of life around 4 to 6 months on average, and is particularly important in Birmingham in the West Midlands region, and also around 1,800 deaths nationally due to road traffic incidents, and that also has increased in Birmingham in recent years. And then of course health and social inequity more broadly, which I know Wasim already touched upon, the importance of focusing interventions and targeting them in the most deprived areas, and that's something which is very much at the forefront of public health action. Next slide. So I'm not going to be able to cover the whole of transport trend history in 5 minutes, but just to really briefly say that actually there's a very clear pattern really post-war, a real increase in car usage and essentially car dependency more broadly. From the 1970s onwards to 2000s, the average distance increased, but actually the number of trips taken stayed relatively static, with a slight decline in recent years. So, and as did the distance travelled. So people essentially were travelling the same, taking a fewer number of trips to travel the same distance, and that was really due to efficiency of mode of transport. A real decline in cycling post-war, and also in bus and rail, with a slight increase in rail in more recent years. And many of the drivers of this, next slide please, just to think historically about what are the pivotal points in terms of these transport patterns. Certainly war, we know war and conflict, which also tends to drive technical innovation as well. So we saw a lot of investment in motor industry and also national control of state resources during the Second World War. Demographic transition, people are living longer, and and that obviously has an impact upon the way they move around. Consumer demand, which has really been a key driver in the most recent decades around lifestyle factors as well, and how people want to travel around. Government framework, interestingly, historically has had less of a direct influence, and it's these other factors really outside the policy framework that have really driven these trends. So where are we now? Well, obviously in the short and medium term, the health protection measures, so social distancing at the moment obviously is leading to a very substantial decrease in public transport capacity, and that was one of the reasons why the emergency active travel scheme that Wasim outlined has been weighted according to those areas which need most support, where there's most people who rely upon public transport. And that really comes back to this government framework, is how much can that now drive transport change moving forwards. Behaviour is difficult to change and is acknowledged in public health to be challenging, but we've seen that tremendous uptake in recreational cycling and walking in recent months. How does that now lock in moving on longer term and retain those behaviours? And I'll pick up on that again. The uncertainty around economic recession, we've seen a reduction of 20% in GDP in a very short space of time. How long lasting that's going to be, and how is the business and wider commerce, public sector adapt to this potentially new working environment? What will we see in terms of longer term patterns of travel for work, particularly? A lot of unknowns there at the moment. Next slide. So the emergency active travel, I think this has already been outlined, but announced on the 9th of May as a major policy intervention, 225 million nationally for this fast track statutory guidance for reallocation of road space. And really this has been coined as a once in a generation opportunity to try and perhaps reverse some of those changing patterns we've seen in transport. What that will achieve for modal shift in terms of changing the way that people take short journeys, particularly around a quarter of trips are less than 1 mile, is still a question, and we can do some modelling to try and predict that, but it's actually very difficult to know because there's so many factors that have changed. And what are the health benefits? Again, we can put some figures to that roughly, but it's very difficult to tell until we see whether these behaviours are sustained. Next slide. So behaviour, I said, is difficult to change. This is just a photograph of McDonald's drive-through the day that McDonald's reopened nationally, their stores, and we saw people going back and using their cars, and that's a number of factors, but I think it reflects elements of the built environment which lock in. There is actually a cycle and footway in the middle of that photo as well, which is obviously empty. But just to really make the point that changing behaviour, and it takes time, and also it takes a whole package of measures in order to achieve sustained behavioural change and lock in that shift to active mode of transport. Next slide. So this is the what we call the COM-B, or the Capability, Opportunity, Motivation model for behavioural change, developed by Suzanne, which is used quite widely, and well, certainly in public health and also more broadly, and in fact with regard to COVID-19 as well. Essentially, we see behaviour as an interacting model of a system of a number of factors, and that actually you need to implement change in more than one of those factors in order to implement behaviour. So it's not just giving people the opportunity, and many people have had the opportunity, for example, during the lockdown period, they may have had more time to be able to walk and cycle, but we also need to give them the knowledge to have motivation behind that, and of course the capability, and that's where those systemic changes come in that we've already seen outlined are indeed planned and to be delivered in the emergency transport plan, but it takes a whole sequence of actions in order to actually influence and change behaviour. Next slide. It's my last slide. So just to say that I think there are real opportunities here. There are challenges. Timescale, it's extraordinary how quickly Birmingham City Council pulled together the emergency transport plan. Need to think how does that link into longer term policies, particularly around planning and land use, governance about the new arrangements, and also how to maintain those. I think health equity from a public health perspective is particularly important in order to achieve both the broader health benefits around physical activity, as well as reducing environmental harms and risks and targeting those. We know that 40% of the most deprived households don't have access to a car, so it is actually a real health equity issue. And finally, I think just public communication. That's why it's fantastic to have this event this evening and about communicating. We saw the tremendous public reaction to a lot of the messaging during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that very clear stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. And I think there is now a sense that is something which is required for achieving this active travel behavioural change, if we're really going to have a pivotal moment now for moving that forwards longer term. Thank you.
No, thank you again. So much covered in so little time. Thank you very much. And just to highlight to everyone, the COM-B model mentioned there, Susan Mitchie has supported this project, in fact. So one of her postgrads delivered a webinar on the COM-B model, and we'll be sharing a link to that recording to everyone who's attended tonight. So questions, we've many comments coming in here. A couple of questions. One from Sandra, who's interested in the health benefits of lockdown. So so the health benefits of the improved air quality, how easy maybe is it to measure that? Or I know we're going to be looking at that later this evening, maybe in terms of the differences in air quality, but yeah, how are we able to look at health benefits?
Yeah, so really with regard to air quality, we look at both short term, so those sort of what we call acute events that happen very quickly in relation to air pollution episodes, but also the chronic longer term. And it tends to be things like symptom exacerbation that changes more in the short term. And that's something which, so that data can be used during the lockdown period to look at how people were experiencing symptoms. For example, I know that asthma prescriptions reduced, but obviously there are other impacts because people weren't necessarily consulting their doctor as regularly as they normally would be. So it's multifactorial. I mean, it's something we're very interested in researching at the University of Birmingham. I know that Bill Bloss will be covering more specifically about the changes in pollutant levels. Although there have been reductions in some pollutants, not all have changed. So there is a mixed picture which needs to be unpicked fully in order to understand the health benefits.
Fantastic, thank you. We'll maybe cover more questions at the end in more detail on that. So thank you very much for so much. So next up we have Stephen Arnold, the head of the Clean Air Zone, who's going to give us an update and an overview.
Okay, so hi, my name's Steve Arnold. I'm the head of Clean Air Zone for Birmingham City Council. My task is the overall delivery program that covers the Clean Air Zone plus a range of additional measures that we were given approval to implement, and it includes things like an expansion of our EV charging network, purchase hydrogen buses. So there's a range of measures really that we're looking at introducing, not just the Clean Air Zone. So could we go to the next slide, please? So we've already touched on the massive growth in road traffic since the war, and road traffic is the single biggest contributor that we have to poor air quality, and that's absolutely the same for Birmingham. In Birmingham, in terms of the 2.8 million journeys that are made each day, roughly 50% of those are made by all other forms of travel other than motor vehicles. So there is absolutely a huge number of motor vehicles on the road. And there's also a stat that we've got from the preparation that we did for the Clean Air Zone, that something like, on average, car owning households in Birmingham use their vehicle or make 3.8 journeys a day. So what we're seeking to achieve through the Clean Air Zone really is to bring the levels of nitrogen dioxide within the legal limits within the shortest possible time. But also by introducing the clean air zone, we're helping to support or hoping to introduce long-term sustainable behaviour change, because that then also helps support some of the aspirations that we've got around climate change, and also works alongside some of the other measures that are going into other strategies such as the transport plan and other policies that we've got around the organisation. So it's a multifaceted approach that we're trying to take. So clean air zones themselves are a policy instrument, if you like, as created by the government. And there's two types of clean air zones. There's a non-charging clean air zone, and then there are chargeable clean air zones, and there's 4 types of chargeable clean air zones. And this slide kind of summarizes, it doesn't cover every single type of vehicle that's covered by each of those categories, but it gives you an idea of just how the different categories of vehicles that are included. So Birmingham is going for a clean air zone type D. If you go to the next slide, that just covers that off. So yeah, so Birmingham is going for a clean air zone type D, so that covers all types of vehicles except for motorcycles. And we were given a delivery fund of just over £50 million to deliver that. So some of that is around about £35 million worth of financial incentives to help support the change. And the rest of the money we've got is to help deliver the infrastructure, the back office systems, and getting all the systems in place, as well as a lot of the campaigns that we'll have to run to make sure that people are aware of this, and also a lot of the engagement activity that we're doing with communities and other significant stakeholders. So from the introduction of the clean air zone, there will be a daily charge in place for the most polluting vehicles. And it's interesting, a number of the times that I'll have these kinds of discussions, these kinds of presentations, a lot of the time we'll start off with an assumption that this is a congestion charge, so all vehicles will be charged, and that's absolutely not the case. It is the most polluting vehicles that will be charged to enter and drive through the clean air zone. And based on the modelling that we did in preparation as part of the business case for the clean air zone, we estimated at the time that would account for anywhere between 20 to 25% of all the vehicles that travel through the clean air zone. And then since that, we're also aware that the number of vehicles that are compliant with the emission standards will have improved as well. So that just talking about the clean air zone and the possibility of the introduction of the clean air zone has helped encourage compliance in the vehicle fleet. But this isn't. But the other thing that's really important within this is how we encourage people to shift to other modes of transport. And again, that's where this work then links into other schemes such as the active travel program, the transport plan, and all those sorts of things. So it's very much working in tandem with all those sorts of other measures. So if we go to the next slide, thank you. So to help support individuals and communities, we've got 2 types of packages of support. There's exemptions, so for a period of time of up to 2 years from the launch of the clean air zone, residents within the CAS, and all of these exemptions and all of the financial incentives are on the basis of ownership of a vehicle that does not meet the emission standards. So residents living within the CAS will be able to apply for a 2-year exemption just to give them a bit of additional time. Individuals travelling into the clean air zone for work earning less than £30,000 will be able to apply for an exemption of up to a year, and so on and so forth. We felt it was really important that through the consultation and engagement that we did for the clean air zone, that certain groups were provided with additional support, and in creating this suite of exemptions as well, what we're trying to do was to avoid overlaps with other types of groups. So there were a very broad range of groups that were considered for exemptions. But again, part of the decision-making process was trying to avoid overlaps, but also also, yeah, ensuring that we were able to achieve compliance in the shortest possible time, because again, that's the overarching driver or objective for this particular program. Can we have the next slide, please? So the other ongoing exemptions or permanent exemptions are for vehicles with disabled or disabled passenger tax class, as I said before, motorcycles, show vehicles, specialist vehicles, which covers emergency vehicles, recovery vehicles, etc., and community and school transport. So those are reasonably standard exemptions that you'll get in similar sort of schemes. You'll see similar sort of exemptions within the ULEZ for London, and also other charging schemes as well. So we've been reasonably trying to get some consistency with other similar sort of schemes. Can we have the next slide, please? So the other way in which we're trying to support change and encourage people to make the change as soon as possible is through a range of financial incentives. So it's, as I said before, it's roughly £35 million in total, and that's split between £10 million that will be used for low-income workers, and that's a scrappage scheme. So the low-income workers within the CAS who own a non-compliant vehicle will be encouraged to apply to scrap that vehicle. They'll then receive £2,000 that can be used towards either the purchase of a compliant vehicle, or it could be used towards a mobility credit. So we're working with Transport for West Midlands on an upgrade to their SWIFT scheme to encourage the adoption of a wide range of modes of transport, so not just buses or trains, just a broad range of things. So they're bringing on more modes of transport into that particular scheme. The other area, significant area of support is for SMEs in the West Midlands, so that those SMEs that operate HGVs and coaches. So again, there's £10 million there, and that can be used for retrofit or the purchase of compliant vehicles. And these vehicles don't have to necessarily be brand new, they can be second-hand. The key thing is that they comply with the emission standards. And then finally, the last area of support is for Birmingham licensed hackney carriage and private hire vehicles. So that's around about £15 million, and there's 6 different schemes that for both of those groups. So again, some of it is about retrofitting, but some of those schemes as well are encouraging the adoption of hybrid or ultra low emission technology. We're also looking to create an EV taxi rental scheme as well. So we'll look to work with a partner and run a fleet of around about 50 electric taxis as a way of encouraging taxi drivers to adopt that technology. So the final point really is that you'll be aware that the Clean Air Zone was due to go live in the summer of this year, but due to the impact of coronavirus and the impact of the lockdown restrictions on our ability to deliver some of the physical infrastructure, we requested a postponement to the launch. So that was agreed to in early April. So the agreement was that we would launch no earlier than the 1st of January 2021. So at the moment, what we're doing is working with a range of stakeholders and also looking at the air quality data as well, which Dr. Bloss will talk about later on, to help inform that decision about when should we be launching the Clean Air Zone, because we know that at the moment, at least during March and April, that the levels of nitrogen oxide fell within the legal limits. But what we are concerned about is that as the volumes of road traffic start to increase, as the economic recovery takes hold, we will see those levels of nitrogen oxide increase again. So we don't want to get to the point where we are illegal at illegal levels. So it's really important that we do introduce the Clean Air Zone. So it's very much a question of when rather than if.
Great, Steve. A good point to end on there, I think. So thank you for covering all the details there. So just one quick question. How will money raised be invested?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. So all of the money, once we've taken out the operational expenses, all of the money left over has to be reinvested in transport-related schemes and policies. It's part of the statutory requirement for a scheme of this particular type. So within the business case, we identified a number of potential areas supporting schemes through Transport for West Midlands. We've also been looking at some other options as well, but we can't really make a commitment as to what we can spend the money on until the clean air zone is actually live and we actually know what the income is. Because whilst we've made projections as to what it might be, those are all absolutely projections, and unfortunately with the impact of COVID and how that's shifting behaviours, that all of those models are potentially irrelevant now. So we're looking at how what might be the impacts with some sensitivity analysis.
Great, Steve. Thank you very much. There's plenty more questions that maybe you could take a look at, and Joe has been kindly answering some questions as well in the chat box there. So we're going to try and up our tech skills here, and Chris is going to share his screen. So welcome to Chris Woods, who has been volunteering as part of the Brum project as an air quality champion, and using some of his knowledge and skills to help us create a visualization tool that we're keen to get feedback on. Chris, just so you're aware, we are just running slightly behind, not too much pressure, but yeah, just so you're aware of that.
Okay, so hi everybody, hope you can hear me. I'm Chris Woods and I volunteered to Brum to help make Birmingham's air quality data more visible, more real, to help people understand the need for change. I worked with Dave Clasby at Sustrans and Paul Burns at Birmingham City Council Environmental Health. They provided the provisional 2019 data that we used. We had 3 goals to clearly show the different levels of air quality in the city and where they are. And that's really important and personal. We all live, work and travel in these areas. And finally, to explain in real terms what impact those different levels of air quality have on our health. People love maps. They help us to instantly orient ourselves and relate to the data. We wanted to create an interactive experience that would allow people to explore and understand. We took annual means of averages of nitrogen dioxide from 94 monitoring stations across the region. 55 of these are within the clean air zone and 36 of those are within the city centre. So now on to the main point of my piece, which is the visualisation itself. So just bear with me for a moment. So you can see here the clean air zone in the centre of the screen, and you can see all the monitoring stations that are in the clean air zone. And if I hover over any of these monitoring stations, it tells you the name of the place where the monitoring station is, the site ID, and the annual mean NO2 reading in that place. And there's a colouring scheme from blue through to orange through to lighter red and darker red, which helps to indicate the levels. And there is some ongoing discussion with our stakeholders about the ranges of those and where they stop and where they finish and what the colours mean and what we might call them. As you can see, as you hover over it, each of these circles, the details pop up. And you might also notice there's a radial or a circular bar chart around the edge, and the reading for that particular station is highlighted with a white border around the edge. And equally, if I hover over any of the bars on there on the ring, it tells me which station it is and highlights the information. So I can look at the particularly high ones, for instance, and see where they are, or the particularly low ones. And this is focusing on the clean air zone area itself. I'm now going to zoom right in, and now you can see the same kind of thing, but for the city centre, you can see there's a smaller number of bars around around the edge, because there's obviously less monitoring stations. And then finally, I want to show you the whole of the region where I zoom out, and you can see many more bars and many more monitoring stations. And I can switch the bars off and I can go and have a hunt around. And I'm particularly interested in this one up here in Sutton Coldfield, which is blue. And I can see it's actually in Newhall, and it's quite low at 16 micrograms per cubic metre. And I wanted to have a bit more of a look at it. And I can see that it's between a residential area and a fairly open space, admittedly with the M6 toll over here. So it kind of gives you a real kind of spatial awareness of where these things are. And now I'm going to zoom right back out again, and I'm going to go back to the centre, and I'm going to zoom into the clean air zone, because I want to have a look at some of these ones around the edge of the zone, and I'm particularly interested in these two little ones here. So these are Lee Bank, and there's one inside the zone just about, and one just outside the zone. So you can see, because it's on a map, you can see it's just a few meters apart. They're different colors, and the one on the inside is reading almost 39, and the one on the outside is reading 28. So quite a big difference, which is I'm not an expert in these matters, but that seems quite a large difference for a small area. So that's the demo of the tool. I'm now going to close this window and hopefully go back to my slide presentation for the last couple of slides. So we're really interested to get feedback from you, what works well, what doesn't work well. We have some work to do with our stakeholders to agree the terminology for each of our 4 levels, what we might call them, and also to work on the colour accessibility to make sure everyone can use this fully. And we want to be able to describe the potential impacts on our health at each of these 4 different levels. And if you have expertise and knowledge in that area, then please get in touch. And once we've done all this, we want to publish and promote it online. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Excellent. You're getting a lot of praise in the chat box. I don't think it's all from your friends and family, so I think so no, really, really excellent. So the questions, I've answered one. Is it live? Is it available? Can you look at it? So no, it's not live yet. As he covered in the last slide there, we're looking for feedback. We do want to make sure the colours are correct. Also, do you call the orange high, or do you call it raised, or do you call it? So those discussions need to be made and agreed with council, and we might need Professor Bloss's input on that as well.
Will do, I think.
So, but yeah, there's a lot of praise coming in the chat box there. If there's any other questions come in on that, keep an eye on that, Chris. You can maybe answer that or at the end. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
So now over to Roger who's joined from ECO Sutton. I heard about ECO Sutton a couple of years ago, doing some air quality monitoring, a community group. So Roger, would you like to talk us through this slide?
Right, thank you very much, Tim. As you can see from the slide, we've been concentrating on particulates at the moment for the last 2 years of monitoring. We have quite a large number of handheld monitors we usually give out to volunteers who then take regular readings for us and feed them back. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at the figures for April and May of this year during lockdown and the same period last year. If you look on the graph, the blue coloured line is the April-May 2019 figures. As you can see, they are very high. The red line across the middle is what is considered the acceptable continuous exposure to PM 2.5s, 10 micrograms per cubic metre. So anything over that really is very hazardous. Anything below it, to be honest, is still hazardous, because World Health Organization says there is no safe exposure level. The orange line shows the 2020 figures. Have you noticed during April, they plummeted very low as 85% lower than last year. But as you notice, as the COVID-19 restrictions have been gradually lifted during May, you'll notice the figures are starting to climb back up again. And we've started getting our June figures in now, and we've already hit the 2019 figures again for June period. So we're right back to square one on the particulates. We're particularly interested because we had one or two areas where there are definite hot spots, especially where there are vehicles are grouped up at junctions and outside schools. And we've been slowly focusing on this, but we're hoping to next year start looking at NOx in the area around Sutton Coldfield to go in depth into that. But basically, overall, at the moment, the last 2 months have been rather nice, having relatively breathable air, but it's going right back to bad again.
Great, Roger. Thank you. So I'm just trying to juggle several. The chats is so active. I'm trying to keep an eye on that for the questions. So what I think will be really interesting is to look at Professor Bloss's data in a couple of minutes, and then he's going to talk more about particulates as part of that. So if you hang around for any more questions at the end, I've not seen a specific question at the moment, just many people saying that that data seems to suggest what they thought, what they felt and observed during lockdown. So thank you very much, Roger, for sharing that. ECO Sutton are on Twitter. You can contact them on there, and again, yeah, any key questions coming in. So we're now going to move to a short presentation from myself and Martin Philpott, Head of Design and Engineering at Sustrans in the Midlands and East. I'm just going to turn my video back on, and Martin, if you do the same. So one of the 4 areas of the emergency transport plan, or of Birmingham's transport plan, was to look at local neighbourhoods and to try and reduce traffic in local neighbourhoods. And this area, this scheme is often called a low traffic neighbourhood or filtered neighbourhood, and it's one area that there's maybe the least understanding about, and we feel has one of the greatest potentials to really improve our health and improve air quality. So here's a definition for you. So it's a residential area where through motor traffic is prevented or discouraged using filters such as planters, bollards or bus gates. Access to homes for drivers, deliveries, emergency services and carers is maintained. And there's some characteristics there of what a successful low traffic neighbourhood entails: about 1 kilometre squared in size. Valuable public space created as part of the scheme. Displacement of traffic onto other residential streets is minimised. The boundary of the area should not mean severance. So still, you can cross the boundary to another area with good pedestrian and cycling crossings. And the strategic corridors within or on the boundaries are also improved with bus priority and segregated cycle lanes, and parking and loading is also managed well. So here we have an area and an example. So I'll just go back there, just let that run through. So the blues and the black little bars there, and the yellow ones are barriers. And I'm just going to let that play again because in the sharing mode it's not letting me pause it, I'm afraid. So you can see how those first 3 arrows are stopping through traffic, so you can still access every home. And the last arrow there is an option that can be created that still does allow through traffic, but it's you know, it's not a direct. It's a bit. It would be a bit of a hassle to drive through that route. So those are sort of different options there. Just let that run one last time. And let's just show you now what a low traffic neighbourhood can look like, what the filters are. Martin.
Yep, so we've got 3 very simple options. We've got bolt down bollards, or bollards are quick and easy, dirty, cheap, point closures, effectively closing off a road. We can make a little bit better. We can put planters in. It's a bit greener. It's a bit more aesthetic. Does the same thing. A little bit more in terms of a maintenance issue. We can combine the two together and put curbs across with planters. We can just curb across the road. But when we're doing that, we need to make sure that we allow the access for bikes. When you see these filters, it's great, but you've still got curbs. You've got to bounce up and down. So we're not quite getting it right yet. Tim, are you doing the next slide? We can look at splitting the filter out. So rather than just having a point closure within the road, we can look at splitting it, having the closure over a much longer distance. Now, if you've got areas of high footfall, or you've got a place where you might get a cafe or something, you can start to create street cafes sort of thing, and just better public spaces. Certainly something to look at. The issue with this type of stuff is you might need to think about what you're linking into at either end. A point closure is just that, it's a line across the road. Whereas this, you might need to think about a crossing point at the next end of the road, and just how you continue those journeys on. Sort of the diagonal filters, again, very, very simple. You can perhaps look at controlling traffic over much more than just the one street. So here you've clearly got 4 streets that the diagonal filter can work along. You want one, there's one in the middle of Bath. You want a city centre that's done it. City centres have done it. This is not something that is alien to the UK. There are places that this is really sort of taking hold of. We might need to think about how the traffic moves around them. You're tightening up the space of certain vehicles. So maybe you have to look at how the traffic flows, and one-way streets is perhaps another way of having to consider at the same time as a diagonal filter. And then you've got to look at things like enforcement. So we know that businesses still need to be served, whether it's deliveries, whether it's refuse, whatever. We can look at time closures. We can look at bus gates. We can look at buying in the business, building in the business community into this, and finding out what they actually need in terms of delivery bays and what they need in terms of delivery timings. It means that there's an element of traffic, but we can control it. AMPR plates, AMPR cameras, and recognising in London is a legal thing. It's again something that needs to be rolled out across the wider UK, but it's something that we know will work, and the DFT will continue looking at how we can monitor some of these things.
Thank you, Martin. So how can a low traffic neighbourhood improve air quality? Well, this visualisation from Waltham Forest, which is one of the best known low traffic neighbourhoods and has been in for over 10 years now, shows the NOx levels in 2007 on the left. So all these areas where the NOx levels are rising to legal levels, that's over 40, although like Roger said, there's no healthy level, the lower the better, but 40 is a sort of line in the sand of what's illegal. So you've got all those areas, residential areas that were suffering from high poor air quality, and then in 2017 you can see how that has totally dissipated. Talk through this slide for an hour just in the slide, but there's so many benefits to economy, retail, vacancy rates down, physical activity levels. I don't know if anyone does the park run every now and then, but basically walking increased on average by 32 minutes. So it's equivalent of over 250,000 people doing park run every week for 3 years. So this should be seen as a public health intervention, a low traffic neighbourhood, not simply an active travel intervention. It's a public health intervention. It's not a new thing, as Martin said. It's not just a London thing and just a Birmingham thing. Manchester in their B-Line schemes with the Andy Burnham and Chris Boardman, they have what they're calling active neighbourhoods, and Sustrans is supporting to deliver those. And the first one is out is in Levenshulme, and this just shows the sort of the size that they're looking at with several pockets of low traffic neighbourhoods. So quickly, just in the chat box, quick activity to make sure you're awake. What year do you think the first filter, or maybe the first low traffic neighbourhood? So just type in there what year. There's no prize for this, just checking that you're awake. Let's see who gets the nearest. Quickly type in there a year. What year do you think the first filter was used, such as the ones you've seen? 1980, 72, 62.
To the earliest one there.
Okay. So this is Pompeii, and I'm not very good at my history, but Pompeii, I think, was around 40 AD, something like that, with the explosion at Vesuvius. But this is what looks like a horse-drawn carriage filter to sort of protect pedestrians crossing and things. So yeah, they've not been it's not a new thing. It's not just from the 70s in Holland or in Europe where they're commonplace. Restricting traffic and making areas safer, better for local people is something that you know, all communities have wanted to do sort of throughout history, and it's something we feel we should really embrace in the city. That is just a whistle-stop tour of low traffic neighbourhoods, and I'm sure there'll be more engagement and learning about them with communities in the coming weeks and months. I've not spotted any questions there, so we'll move on to Professor Bloss. I'll turn off my video as well, and Martin, if you want to do the same.
Yep.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, okay. Thanks, Tim. Good evening, everyone. Thanks to Sustrans and Birmingham City Council for the invitation to speak this evening. My name is William Bloss. I'm Professor of Atmospheric Science at the University of Birmingham. And I work with a team of researchers at the university who've been looking at various aspects of air quality and health across the city. And this evening, I want to show you very briefly what we've seen happen to our air quality since March this year. So if we skip on a slide. So we're going to be talking about two key air pollutants. We're going to be talking about nitrogen dioxide, or NO2, which is a gas, and NO2 is produced mainly when we burn things at high temperatures. And in Birmingham, that means overwhelmingly in the engines of road traffic, internal combustion engine vehicles. We're also going to be talking about fine particles, or PM, and within that, the PM 2.5, which are the particles that are small enough to breathe in and to penetrate down into the fine airways in our lungs. So it's NO2 and fine particles this evening. If we jump onto the next slide, I thought I'd start off by showing you a little bit about what has happened. So the left-hand picture here shows you the traffic levels measured at one of the sites on the Birmingham Ring Road. And the timeline on the bottom, you won't be able to see the details, but it goes from the start of March until early June. So you can see in early March, we were kind of at our normal levels and things began to decline. And then we had the lockdown formally coming into effect on the 23rd of March, and the levels reached their lowest levels. And since then, you can see they've been slowly building up again. And the kind of pattern of bumps you can see there is the weekly cycle, the Monday to Friday, and Saturday and Sunday levels. So we're on a sort of steadily rising trend. And if we put a line through that, we'd get back to business as usual levels, something like October, November this year. Right-hand plot just shows you what happened to speeds. So the blue sort of pictures on the top, blue symbols, are speeds measured during the lockdown, and the red ones underneath them are speeds measured before the lockdown period, and this is an average over a weekday from 7 AM to 7 PM. So you can see speeds on the roads increased and they became a lot more even. You can see from the size of the bars that the big variability from congestion disappeared to an extent, and this is also on a ring road monitoring site. So there's changes in traffic, and that will change emissions of air pollutants. Then the question is, what happened to the air pollution levels in the air? And if we jump on to the next slide, we can see an example of that. So this is a little bit hard to make out. What you can see here are levels of NO2 in blue and PM 2.5 in red, measured at the university campus, so somewhere a little bit away from roads, over a period from the start of February to the 10th of May. And the black dashed line in the middle shows you when the lockdown came into effect, the 23rd of March. So if you look at that, it's pretty hard to say that there was instantly a dramatic change. And what's happening there is we're seeing the effect of emissions, but also the effect of weather. So when pollutants are released into the air, they're blown around and diluted by the weather. And that weather also brings pollutants or clean air, depending on the wind, to Birmingham from elsewhere. So we've got to think about the impacts of weather as well as emissions in understanding what's happening to the pollutant levels. And it's quite hard to see what's happening from the raw data alone. But the story is a little bit clearer than that if we average up our data. So if we jump to the next slide, what you can see here are measured levels of NO2 in the top graph and PM2.5 in the bottom graph. And these are shown as a function of the time of day. So we're going from midnight through the midday period to midnight again along the horizontal axis, along the x-axis. The red shaded here shows you the average levels measured from late March to May over 2017, 2018 and 2019. So business as usual, if you like. And the bluey green colour shows you the same time period, March to May, for this year, 2020, during the lockdown. So you can see a few things from this. You can see that the NO2 levels, when we average them up and get rid of some of that weather variability, were a lot lower this year. We can see that the big bumps, which correlate to the morning and evening rush hours, kind of 7 to 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. to 7 p.m, are sort of smoothed out. We can see that the levels are much closer together at midnight, and that's kind of sensible because the traffic hasn't changed so much at midnight. You can also see the difference is much bigger for NO2 than for PM2.5. And that reflects the fact that in Birmingham, NO2 sources are overwhelmingly dominated by road traffic, but PM2.5 has a much more complex mix of sources that includes traffic, but also industrial activity, domestic activity, and a big chunk of transport from elsewhere in the country and overseas, because PM lasts a lot longer in the air than the NO2 does. So the pictures we're looking at now are for a ring road site, a roadside site, so right close to the traffic emissions. If we jump onto the next slide, we can see the equivalent of the measurement site in Acox Green. So this is what we call an urban background location. It's a little way away from major roads, and it's probably a bit more representative of what most people are breathing in, because not many of us live on the ring road. So you can see the same sort of patterns there, but the difference is smaller as we're a little bit further away from the emissions sources. What we're doing now to try and quantify this more precisely is take the impact of weather out more mathematically. So if we jump onto the final slide of graphs of data, this is just an example of what some of my colleagues are doing to remove the impact of weather and allow us to compare more directly how the NO2 levels in the lockdown COVID year compare with previous years. So what we can do is determine the link between weather and air pollution, or weather and NO2, using the time period before coronavirus arrived. We can use that to predict the NO2 levels we'd expect for the weather we happen to have had in 2020, and that gives us the blue line. And then we can compare that with what we actually see, and that gives us the red line. And so the difference between the blue and the red there is the impact of the reduction in traffic, and that's taking out the impact of the weather. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of what we've actually seen. Just wanted to finish off by maybe touching on the future. So I'll jump through the next few simple graphs very quickly. So before COVID-19 arrived, we had our usual traffic levels. COVID-19 appeared and we reduced our activity and the lockdown happened. And if we skip on, we can see, and again, we can see that represented. And what we're interested in is what happens next. Do we go back to business as usual? If we jump onto the next slide, can we come back to some new normal, if you like? Can we manage to sustain and maintain the active travel that we face? Or is it a bit more complicated than that? Are we going to have an overshoot? Are we going to have an increase in private car use as people are wary of using public transport? And if so, will that relax back down to business as usual? Or if we jump to a final picture, will it carry on coming down to some new normal again? And then overlaid on that, we have the economic aspects of reduced economic activity likely in the near term, of course. So I'm sure we'll have some questions about that and what we think the future will be. But my final slide just summarises some of the points that we've seen a big change in traffic and other activity, and that's led to much lower emissions. But simple comparisons of pollutant levels before and after can be misleading because the weather impacts things a lot. NO2 fell a lot during lockdown, and that gives us confidence that significant reduction in vehicle levels will give us improved air quality and improved health. But the picture's more complicated for fine particles. And I guess a key question, and one of the key things we're trying to influence here, is the future trajectory and recovery that we follow. And I'll stop there. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you so much. That was all, yeah, really thought-provoking, and it's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Really, yeah. What is the new normal as such going to look like? So we've had a lot of comments sort of coming in, and trying to collate all the questions. There's been, you know, the chat box is saved. So we are going to try and get back to people after this evening with answers for any that we don't manage to cover. I think just trying to get to sorry, apologies. I'm just trying to scroll through the thousands of comments, it feels like. So the feedback is just very much that it's, you know, really clearly presented, and I'm sensing quite a lot of questions around actually public engagement. And I don't know if from the university's point of view and the project's point of view in West Midlands Air is how we can, I suppose, link all this together, and how can we get people aware of these issues, and but then also on board with the transport plan that is trying to tackle these issues and keep traffic levels lower.
Yeah, I guess from the point of view of the university project, you know, we are funded by the Natural Environment Research Council to do this research for the benefit of the people in the UK and in Birmingham. So I think our role is trying to put the best analysis of these data forward, and to help people understand the impacts and measures and changes they can make in their own lives to improve air quality and reduce the air quality penalty on others. And hopefully events like this evening and the engagement with the Clean Air Champions, etc., will be one of the mechanisms by which we can help disseminate that into the wider communities.
Great. The low traffic neighbourhoods, not maybe directly for you and I, Martin, you can be pleased to know. If speakers want to pop their videos just back on so we can check you're still there. So one question is, how do we bring communities on board with low traffic neighbourhoods and the transport plan? I'd like to welcome Joe Green to the panel, who working hard at Birmingham City Council. So that may be a question for you, Joe, or myself as head of delivery at Sustrans that we do a lot of community engagement. But Joe, do you want to put you in at the deep end?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the key things to bringing a lot of this in and making it work and making it stick is taking people with you. So with the transport plan, with the clean air zone, particularly with low traffic neighbourhoods, building community support and getting buy-in is essential. I mean, with something like the clean air zone, obviously we've got quite a bit of opposition. What we want is sort of a situation where the majority of residents across Birmingham are calling for the council to introduce clean air zones and other measures like low traffic neighbourhoods, school streets. I think in terms of how you do that, I mean, I mentioned in the chat that we have to sell the benefits. I know something that's happened quite a bit the last couple of months is people have been out walking and cycling a lot more, shopping locally, but also talking to neighbours and friends and everything, noticing the reduction in traffic, noticing the improvement in air quality. So part of the conversation is, well, how do we sustain some of those benefits? I think also making sure that it is sort of spread across all of our citizens, and picking up a couple of the comments around reaching all communities. And this isn't just for the more affluent parts of the city. This is around inner city Birmingham, parts of the city that are incredibly car dominated at the moment, and making sure that group champions and advocates reflect the diversity of all of Birmingham's citizens is key as well. So I think we're working with partners, with groups like Sustrans and various others, and with lots of, sort of individuals that have engaged through this. Clean air champions, Brum champions are our advocates, are our messengers. So we value all the sort of support that you give to this in terms of outlining why we're doing these things, what the benefits are. And then finally, I think we are going to be piloting some of these things, including low traffic neighbourhoods, in the next couple of months as part of the Emergency Active Travel Fund. It's going to be a bit weird because we do have to introduce these schemes very quickly. So in the next sort of 4 to 8 weeks, which doesn't allow for as much sort of engagement beforehand. But I think what we want to do is use some of these temporary trial measures as sort of live consultations and engagements. So when they're in place, use them as an opportunity to speak to people about how it's working, any differences they're noticing, whether they think it's an improvement or not, and using it as the starting point for the engagement. Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. Let's move to some other questions. We've just had so many. So one, just again on sort of infrastructure or common issues, is around pavement parking and that side of thing, and also on the clean air zone, how do we want to be an increase in people using false number plates? So around those sort of those behaviours that blight every school street, you know, where there isn't a car-free school street. So does anyone want to come in on that, sort of Steve or anyone else looking at? Hi, Steve. Sorry, I don't know if you had any IT issues there.
No, that's fine. So on the question of people trying to avoid paying the charge, I mean, it's an interesting one. And, you know, human nature being human nature, there will be some people who will try to avoid the charge. However, you know, experience with other schemes and from other from London in particular, who've already introduced the congestion charge and its ULEZ, is that there is a little bit, but it's really, really, really small. You know, generally, and the data we've already seen from the ULEZ as well, you know, clearly indicates that the ULEZ and the charges imposed, you know, encourages people to do something different. They've seen reductions in traffic and they've seen improvements in air quality as a result. One of the things that we're mindful of is actually the risk of people trying to not necessarily use false number plates, but avoid paying the charge. And so we get more traffic using the ring road, which then potentially just shifts the problem. So we're putting in additional monitoring stations, we're putting in additional traffic count systems so that we can actually monitor that, not necessarily in real time, but be absolutely on top of what behaviour changes and traffic flows, how they are being impacted, so that we can do something about it. Because if we don't want to just shift the problem from the city centre, which is where the CAS has been put in place to tackle the worst issues. We really don't want to just put something in place and then just find that the problem shifts. So we have to be active about that. And again, as I've stressed before, and Joe talked about this in what he was talking about as well, the clean air zone and the active travel schemes and all, the investment in cycling infrastructure, the walking schemes, all those sorts of things, that they're not in individual items, that everything has to work together. And there's a little bit of encouragement within some of these things, a little bit of asking people to do something different, which won't be easy at first, but then by the same token, by making that encouragement a little bit more forceful, by saying, all these things are going to be put in place to help you, to make this easier for you, but if you don't, then there's this charge that will encourage that change. But again, our goal with the clean air zone is to address nitrogen dioxide, which is caused through vehicle traffic. That's our single-minded objective that we have with this, which is helpful, actually.
Great, thank you, Steve. Let's try and wrestle through a few more questions. So if I can ask speakers, let's challenge ourselves to get through another 3 in the next few minutes before we have to do a prize draw and close. So safety on canals is something that's been mentioned. It's been in the press quite a bit recently, so I don't know, Joe, that maybe, sorry if a few of these all land on your plate, but is that something that is being considered as part of the emergency measures in any way? I know it's as Sustrans, as we manage the National Cycle Network, lots of green routes, it's a problem that we have to sort of manage and are trying to improve as well.
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it brief. I mean, I think one thing that's essential to encouraging people to cycle more is that they feel that it's a safe, normal activity. So everything that we do is around trying to sort of present it as such, partly through sort of provision of safe, segregated, protected infrastructure, but also sort of getting across that it's a normal activity. I think we're really fortunate in Birmingham. We've got some fantastic canals. I think someone told me once, even more than Venice. But obviously we did have a spate of incidents a week or so ago, which was absolutely disgusting. We've been working with the police and Canal and River Trust to do everything we can to sort of support the investigation into that. And also I know the police have been out doing sort of community patrols. We don't want people to stop using the canals for walking, cycling, those social activities. We need to sort of make sure that people do feel safe to do so, and anything we can do in terms of increased sort of presence around there, lighting in some sections we sort of look at, and encouraging people to, if they are a bit less confident, maybe going out in pairs or groups where they're able to. But I think with any sort of disgusting incident like that, is we can't let decent, normal people going around their everyday lives be put off using those routes. So I sort of encourage more and more people to get out on the canals, and sometimes the best counterbalance to antisocial behaviour is more and more social behaviour. So yeah, I think let's hopefully clamp down on that, work with the police to do what we can to bring a halt to it.
Yeah, and it's maybe a further conversation sort of needed around that, so thanks, Joe. So a question for the University of Birmingham team, West Midlands Air team, particulates, what is their source? Have you been doing any analysis on particulates? I know they're very tiny. I know very little about them. Where do they come from? Can you look at a particulate and work out, has it come from wood burning fire, or has it come from a tyre?
Yeah, shall I take that one, Tim?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. They come from lots of different places. So they come from exhaust emissions, they come from brake and tyre wear and road surface resuspension. They come from cooking, they come from wood burning, they come from power generation, industrial activities. Some of them come from farming, and some of them are formed in the air by emissions from those and other sources interacting. And that's what makes the particles so much harder in a way to tackle than the NO2, the nitrogen dioxide, which comes more or less solely from vehicle exhaust, at least as far as cities like Birmingham are concerned. Which is most important depends very much where you are. If you choose to lie on the roadway of the A38M Queensway through the middle of Birmingham, then the vehicle source is going to be dominant. If you've got a really smoky wood fire and your chimney's blocked, then you're sitting in your living room, that source of indoor air pollution, the wood smoke, is going to be dominant for you. But across the city as a whole, so I'm looking at some numbers now from a study from DEFRA, about 45% of the particles come from regional sources, so further away from immediate roads. About 20% of the particle loading in the UK comes from overseas, so it's transported a long way. Across the UK as a whole, something like 15% of it comes from urban traffic sources, and about 20% comes from other urban activity. But those are averaged across the UK as a whole. And as I say, if you choose to sit on the A38 Queensway, the proportions are going to look different.
Great, thank you. So I can't get a wood burning fire then. So okay, thank you. So we're almost out of time. There's been several questions. I think Joe, you may be kindly trying to answer some in the chat box. But I'll just take one around sort of inequalities and trying to ensure we hear all the voices from all corners and sections of the community. So we're hopeful that the Brumbreeze project will be extended. That's just to be confirmed in the coming weeks. One issue with lockdown and moving to a digital platform is that is less equitable, and Sustrans is doing a lot of work to try and work around those areas, and we're keen to be able to get back out there and make sure we hear all voices. So it is really important, if you are from a community group, that you don't just hear from the people that shout the loudest and the most common voices that are shouting the loudest. And community groups have been working hard on that, and we're looking at mapping tools, so we can map everyone's postcodes that's attended training, and then we can see where there are gaps in our delivery. And I know it's something that Joe and Wazim, we're not maybe going to cover now and needs further discussion, but we'll be really keen that this isn't just for these schemes, and the improvement isn't just for the healthiest and the wealthiest. Where we'll get the most health benefits is by impacting all demographics in the city, so and those most deprived areas. So I'm going to just move on now to next steps. So one of my colleagues, Gavin, I think has launched the poll again already. I'm struggling with different screens here to manage the chat box and the poll and the presentations, but I'm hoping that is launched again. So please complete the poll. Also share feedback on tonight's event. Do you want more of these events from Sustrans, from the City Council? Do you want more events on a particular topic, on the health impacts? Do you want a meeting with Chris to quiz him about his visualization tool, or to get in touch with ECO Sutton? So yeah, give us feedback in the chat box. Use Brumbreeze on social media, and you can email us as well. And I'll be hanging on for a few minutes, and some of the team will. So if you want to direct chat with us, go for it. Next steps, as I said, we're hoping that funding will be extended. So this was initially just a 6-month project until the end of June, because with the clean air zone being delayed, we feel we've got everyone that signed up tonight, 60 people and 15 community faith groups that have engaged so far, and we need to really continue these conversations and keep spreading all the resources that have been co-designed and things like that lockdown has prevented us from sharing effectively. So I know this, you've obviously found every minute of tonight riveting, but we have an air quality monitor here, a Flow air quality monitor, retails at over $100, and it looks at particulates and nitrogen NOx, nitrogen dioxide. Somebody will correct me if I said the wrong term there. And it's got a great app, and the winner for that is Hannah. For the air quality monitor. So please maybe direct myself or Riddy. I'm a bit worried that there's 10 Hannahs on the call, so we may have to do a second draw between Hannahs. And then we have two refurbished hybrid Ridgeback bikes, and those have gone to Cameron Shezad and Angela Nixon. So if you can stay on, because we'll hope to get those delivered to you within about a week or two. So in a socially distant, safe way. So congratulations, Hannah. If you can, direct well, I need to just check with Riddy if there's several Hannahs, and we may need to do a second draw. But Angela and Cameron, congratulations. Some bikes are coming your way. So that leaves us to close the event. There were questions about school streets. This is from Cofton Primary School, where we delivered a car-free school street in March 2019, and that's now been made a permanent one. I will just answer that question for Joe. So there is plans to deliver more car-free school streets from the autumn term, and Joe and his team doing a lot of evaluation on the 6 that have been running this year. They've already got schools lined up and requesting more of those. So from a social equality point of view, again, they're something really Sustrans really support as a way, as not just to improve active travel rates and safety at school, but also for socially distancing at the moment as well. So thank you, everyone. I will go and try and find out who's won the air quality monitor. Thank you again to all of our speakers for giving up your time and engaging tonight. I think about 85 was the maximum number we had on the call tonight at the meeting, which with this weather is truly astounding. So thank you everyone for engaging, and have a good rest of the evening.